You had 12 hours where she wasn't, like, sucking your cock and you're pissed at her now? Like, oh my God.
We all know guys like
this. We know
this,
about that guy. We all know about that guy.
We all know about those guys. They're super fun to hang out with, but you don't get in a relationship with them. Yeah. At least I don't. Hi, we're Kelly and Julie, and we're here to find love. Today we're getting into a bachelorette recap of Gabby and Rachel season. This week's episode was fantasy suites, and I absolutely hate mimicking this phrase, but it may have been the most dramatic fantasy suites that we've seen in a very long time.
It's true.
Right? Like, it was so mind-boggling. We're gonna talk about the Rachel Zach controversy and what we think about all of Gabby's men kind of dropping like flies at the very end. I'm still in disbelief about it, but if you're new here, welcome. We're two dating coaches who analyze the relationship psychology and dating themes in reality TV shows, especially The Bachelor and The Bachelorette. So if you're into this kind of stuff, hit that subscribe button to follow along and join the conversation.
So we'll start by talking about all of Rachel's guys and everything that happened on Rachel's side of this story, and then we're going to get into Gabby and everything that happened with Gabby's fantasy suites. Rachel had 3 fantasy suites. It was with Aven, then Tino, and then Zach in that order. So let's start off with Aven.
It feels very much like, okay, this is an amazing connection. They would have swiped right to each other on Hinge. They would have had maybe a 2-year relationship, gone to some really cute weddings together. But outside of that, there's really nothing that I don't know anything about Aven still. I don't really know about how he makes her feel. They just seem like a very sweet connection. Just maybe not like Bachelor noteworthy.
Totally agree. Like, I feel like they seemed cute. I liked their dynamic. There was nothing wrong, but it just
I like how you're speaking. It's so haunting. You're like, I feel you're just pulling out words.
It's just kind of, I feel like I like Aven, but I also don't know Aven. Like, I also kind of wonder if outside of this environment, like, doesn't he seem like the kind of guy who probably is a little bit more like upbeat and chummy when he's like comfortable like around his friends versus in this environment? His energy felt very medium to me, like very restrained or just like, you know, withheld. And so I don't know, I just felt like he didn't seem like he was super opening up, at least on camera, or able to be himself. I was surprised that she said, I'm falling in love with him. Maybe there is more that we are not seeing. The edit just like didn't give us what we needed to see to understand this relationship, but I was shocked. And I was shocked that he said it to her too. Did you notice that when he, during their, right before they went into the fantasy suites and they were sitting at dinner, she was like, are you ready to be engaged to me? And he kind of like hesitated a little bit, and then he was like, yes, definitely. And I wasn't sure, again, if it was like the editing or if like he really was like hesitating and is less sure than he is making himself out to be.
I do think they're very adorable, and it sounds like from how the dates went, they're gonna be the top. Like, Aven will be the top 2 with Tino. Yeah. It didn't seem like that with Zach, but we'll get into that in a minute.
Let's talk about Tino first, because he had the next hometown directly after Aven. First of all, I feel like we need to talk about the fact that Tino was fully melting down during Fantasy Suites week. Like, before he had his fantasy suite, he was just like brooding around the hotel room, just kind of like complaining about the fact that she's doing overnights. He said something that was like, I don't need to sleep with anyone else. Why does she need to sleep with anyone else? And I was just kind of like, Tino, are you seriously dating 2 other women? No. So then, like, why are you comparing what you would want to do to what she would want to do? Like, it's completely different. So I don't know. I continue to get like possessive energy from him, and like little red flags after little red flags. Like, nothing that's like so horrendous, but everything I'm just like, I just feel like something awful is just around the corner with Tino. Like, I keep feeling that way.
Yeah, Tino continues not to win me over. Each week, like starting off at the very top where Rachel said, hey, this is really problematic that your parents specifically told me we do not like you before she left. Like, that's a really huge thing to say. They said they were going to
disown Tino if you got engaged. I was like, what?
Huge. That's such a statement to say, such harsh words to say. When she presented that conversation to Tino, he didn't validate her feelings. He kind of glossed over it. He said, no, for sure, if we got engaged, I know that they're not going to be mad at you. They're not going to be mad at me. They're going to really love us. That, to me, was indicative of his conflict style, which is a huge red flag. He wasn't able to dig into it. He wasn't able to hear her experience. He wasn't able to say like, okay, this is a really problematic situation that we're in. I'm going to talk to the producers and like talk to my parents directly and defend the relationship, do something that shows that I care about you and I care about what you're saying. And I don't want our engagement to start off on the wrong foot because this means a lot to me. Instead, he's buying into this fairy tale of love conquers all. If I'm in love with you, if you're in love with me, that means that they will just clearly see our side. For him to kind of just say, I love you, and for both of them to forget this huge thing that is impacting their relationship and they're not even engaged yet. I just don't know what Rachel's thinking in this moment. She's just so caught up by this man, and I don't understand the captivation. He just feels so, to me, like really creepy, like not a good guy to date.
Yeah. I know. I kind of, once again, I feel validated because you and I did not like Tino, like basically from the beginning.
From the
jump. We were just like very, around the time and everyone was like, oh my God, he's so romantic. Look how he's like sweeping her off his feet. I was like, I don't know. It just seems like he has this weird idea of romance where it's like, he is trying to force it using like loving, if I love you aggressively enough, everything else will fade away. I'm gonna like make this relationship work, with brute force. And like relationships don't ever work in that way. They always need to be worked through with like softness and tenderness and like depth and actually going in and talking about the issues and not just kind of glazing them over with like, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, and therefore the problems aren't here. In some ways it feels like a little like juvenile. Like it kind of gives me like, I don't know, the way that my relationships worked when I was like 15, like that's kind of like
what I thought. If I was 15, I would have loved his energy.
Right.
At my current age, I'm running away. Right. I'm not staying around.
I audibly gasped when she said, I love you back.
I love you too. I really do.
Like, oh my God. It was so shocking to me. I just didn't expect to hear her say that. I thought that she would be a little bit more withheld about using the love word, considering everything that she went through on Clayton's season. So I was just so surprised to hear her say it. Now, I don't think that it is wrong for her to say it. I mean, back in Clayton's season, you and I were pretty much in the camp of it's okay to love more than one person and to be frank about that is what you're feeling. Like, I think it's okay for her to love more than one person. The thing that gives me some question marks, just that considering it was such a huge problem for her in Clayton's season, I was kind of surprised to see her do it in this season. It made me wonder if she is getting kind of caught up in the Tino story and almost like losing sight of her own values. Like, I almost feel like if she was thinking clearly, she might not have done that. This relationship feels like it is almost like pulling the worst out of both of them, if that makes sense. Like, it's kind of the kind of relationship that is making her forget about the things that matter to her. And so that's a good indicator that, maybe this is not the healthiest relationship of all time. If I can't really stay true to myself and what I believe in, what I'm in this relationship, that's probably a good indicator that it's not the healthiest for me.
You're right on. I really do believe that her trauma and her not having an opportunity to recover from Clayton's season is she has these blinders on when she's with Tino. And her trauma is distorting Tino into this storyline that she really wants to be a part of. She really wants it to be him. He was her first impression. I think she was the first guy that she realized, oh my God, this journey could really work for me. And she's hinging so much onto that even though there are really clear markers of Tino not being able to be graceful to her journey, his family doesn't like her. He's saying all of these really problematic things instead of addressing these conflicts head on. He's just, hey, like, I really love you. I think that we're going to work it out no matter what. She wants to buy into that so much that she can't see him clearly. And I believe that if she chooses him, it will be a mistake and they're not going to last even a few months after the final rose. I just can't see it.
I mean, I really hated what he said, which is, I don't need to sleep with anybody else. Like, to me, it felt just so dismissive of her agency and just dismissive of her judgment, right? Like, I don't know, it just felt like he was kind of saying like, I think that the way I would behave in this situation is the only way and the right way. I don't know. I just didn't really like hearing him talk about her in that way, which again kind of speaks to the idea that I feel like I keep feeling like something bad is right around the corner with him. You know, behind closed doors, if enough time passes, like there could be much more heated types of conflicts between the two of them.
She is really insecure. And it's appealing to Tino's attachment style, which feels very anxious almost and very rocky and like, I kind of want you, I need you, please give me more affirmation. But being around Tino could be so seductive, like that high and low rockiness that could be very appealing to someone that wants like this big, ripe romance, which I do think Rachel is kind of clamoring for.
Wait, this actually just reminded me of something that happened actually later in Zach's date when they were talking about their parents and how their parents fight. And Zach was like, oh, I never raised my voice and I've never even really seen my parents raise their voices at each other. And Rachel was so confused by that.
It's like,
My parents would be fighting the whole time.
No.
Well, not fighting, but they like, the way they communicate is by like raising their voice.
Gotcha. I don't think I've ever raised my voice. No one in my family raises voice.
Oh.
Rachel was like, my parents yell at each other all the time. Like, that's normal. Like, she was like, peaceful conflict.
Okay.
Don't know about that. Like, she was like confused by the idea of peaceful conflict. And she basically said that she saw her parents fighting loudly, yelling at each other throughout her childhood. That's basically what she told us, which to me was like, gave me the little ding, ding, ding. Like, maybe that's why people like Tino, where there's such highs and lows and conflict, maybe that's why that kind of relationship is so appealing to her, because it's kind of maybe what she saw growing up, right? If you witness a high conflict relationship from childhood, and that is your idea of what real love is we fight all the time, but then we love each other so much, so we just stick through it. And isn't that romantic? That makes it like that. It's so intense because we're willing to put up with so much shit. And it's like, oh, no. Like, sticking around through a toxic relationship is not something to applaud and clap about. But I get the sense that because that is what Rachel saw throughout her childhood, it's fully possible that she thinks that this is romantic, that conflict, high drama, high intensity relationships like what she has with Tino, it's possible that she views that as romantic. I mean, I guess that's what we're seeing, right? I think that's why he's so alluring.
It's really frustrating that a lot of our behaviors in our relationships could be traced back to our childhood, but they really can, because our parents' relationship, it was the first relationship we saw modeled for us. And, you know, she was in Clayton was her ex, so yeah, homegirl is pretty traumatized right now. She's not being as discerning as she can be, but I really do think that the more distance, the more time, the more maturation she has in processing everything of Zach, processing everything of Tino, she will be able to see, oh my gosh, this guy is a walking red flag.
Maybe that's why the relationship with Zach that is safer and more secure doesn't quite feel as exciting to her, because she's learned that romance is supposed to hurt, or that love. She even said that to Tyler, didn't she? Oh my God, it's all coming back to me. Like, she said that to Tyler, didn't she? She was like, love is supposed to hurt. Like, when it hurts, like, that's when you know it's real. She said, like, that kind of stuff when they were having their little one-on-one.
She's a masochist. And then she's on The Bachelorette, which is this super inflated, really romanticized, very, like, veneered love story. So everything is kind of feeding into this fantasy that she is actively colluding in as well. She is in dangerous territory right now.
As always, we'll add the caveat that we don't know Rachel. We're like, you know, we only know as much as she's shared on this television show. So this is just our analysis based on what has been presented to us. There could be so much more that we don't know about Rachel, her story, her family, but that is a good, just general maybe takeaway, or a good general lesson that we can all think about in our relationships. Like, what are the relationships that were modeled to us when we were younger? What is the form of love or the kind of dynamic in a relationship that has been presented to us as positive, as has been presented to us as desirable? And is that actually what a healthy relationship is and should look like? Can we take a clearer look at our relationships and see, is this good for me, or is this just familiar. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about Zach and Rachel and what happened in Zach and Rachel's fantasy suites, because this was obviously the big kind of cliffhanger. This was kind of like the big drama of the end of the episode. It seems like this is going to be the drama of next week and our finale. For those of you who didn't watch, the long and short of it is the two of them went on a pretty normal fantasy suite date. They went into the overnight, cameras off, and they came out and things seem to have changed very dramatically. Zach is in his in the moment interviews just explaining that he thinks Rachel was different during their overnight when the cameras are off. He felt like she was being inauthentic. He mentioned that she brought up his age and questioned whether he was ready for marriage, and he was pretty just kind of convinced that maybe she is like a different person than the Rachel he fell in love with.
It's like we were two strangers. I don't know what it could be, but Rachel's concern came out of nowhere, and I think it's to be honest, and she was putting on a front.
Ooh, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I took the liberty of checking out what's going on internet, on Twitter and social media. Man, people are mad. They do not like Rachel. People are like really, really upset. The trouble with this is that, of course, we don't yet have Rachel's side of the story. The entire after the fantasy suites edit was all Zach's point of view, all Zach's interviews. We didn't get a single shot of Rachel or a single bit of Rachel's analysis or explanation of what happened in the fantasy suite. So it was fully and solely Zach's point of view, which to me just gives me a little bit of what is editing trying to do? Is editing trying to make us, see Rachel as the villain in this situation? Why would they not give her any airtime to explain what happened from her point of view? To me, that's like, they're trying to set us up. They're trying to set up a story and narrative around what happened in that scene. So that's one thing that I noticed about that. The other thing that I was just kind of perplexed about was what they were talking about. Obviously, we don't know because the fantasy suites are not shown, but it seemed like the thing that Zach pulled away from his problem with what happened was that she seemed different. And I'm confused because it seems like they got into the fantasy suites, they had conversations about politics, they said, religion, and age. And those are tense topics. If they disagree about these things, then it makes sense that it could shift the way you're viewing the relationship. So in my head, if Rachel heard, for example, she sits down and she finds out that Zach is secretly, a conservative and she didn't know and she's a liberal, that would actually make me think, okay, I need to pause and I need to not just fall into this fantasy. I need to actually think about what's going on. If all of a sudden I'm like in a normal home situation with Zach and his energy when cameras are off and when we're not in these like fantastic date situations is a lot more childish than what I had thought, maybe I will like think, let me like try to like get my wits about me before I just keep leaning into like, oh my God, Zach, I'm so in love with you. Oh my God, Zach, like I would like want to like, take a beat to have those conversations. But he seemed pretty upset that she was not just continuing to shower him with affection. I get a weird vibe from what Zach was trying to say about her, this idea that if she's not always chirpy, happy, and affectionate, there's something wrong with her. That, I don't know, that gives me a weird energy. Like, women are not always happy, chirpy, and affectionate. And so the fact that made him feel like she's not being authentic, to me, it was like, Rachel is allowed to have emotions, people. Like, everyone's mad that she's crying. People are mad when she's upset. People are mad, apparently, when she doesn't want to just be overly affectionate with every man who's in love with her. People are mad at her for breaking up with Tyler. People are mad at her for breaking up with Jordan. Now people are mad at her for not wanting to reciprocate Zach's feelings. And I just don't get it. I'm like, she's allowed to not want to reciprocate Zach's feeling. She's allowed to see something that she doesn't like in Zach and decide that she doesn't want to throw herself at him. Like, she's allowed to do that. So I don't know. I'm just so confused. I'm confused by the internet's hate on her. It just seems like people were really almost like excited to find another reason to hate on Rachel. That's what it felt like to me, like on the internet, as far as how people were reacting to this. But I'm like, we don't even really know what happened. And the fact that people are so excited to hate on her, I guess Zach included, I'm just like, I'm baffled. I just feel like Rachel is getting, I don't know, no one is giving her any grace in this situation, including Zach.
Yeah. I would say that with Zach, out of her top 3, she has more chemistry clearly with Tino and also of Aven. I really do think she's physically attracted to him, whereas to me, Zach feels like a perfect on paper match. I should like him. I should be with a guy like that, but there might be the spark that's missing that she really needs to kind of flame out to have this be like her final person. She is a complex person. She's allowed to show her feelings. This side of Rachel, I believe, is a really big part of her personality as well. And a part of her personality that she's kind of not displaying with Tino because she is so wrapped up in being this ideal for him or kind of stepping into this fantasy with him that she's kind of hiding this more logical, rational side. But with Zach, because her feelings are not as invested, she's able to demonstrate, this is what it's like when I am being really thoughtful and intentional about my decisions. I don't think it's you at the end. Let me kind of soften the breakup almost by thinking that your age could be a thing because theoretically there's nothing wrong with you, but outside of the top 3 you have, you can't get there to the final 2. So maybe that could have been a way for cushioning the blow a little bit. Her not being super bubbly and then Zach being really caught off guard because he's only seen Rachel to be this very bubbly, smiley, optimistic, happy person. But she has more range than that. Her emotional range is the same, like it's complex, and for him not to be able to acknowledge it and for him to throw out words like she was being inauthentic, the side of me that she showed was he basically said she was fake about saying it. Like the way that he walked around that conversation of Jesse to me was a sign of his emotional immaturity. Like why wouldn't you bring up anything during the fantasy suites, during that morning after, instead of marching over to Jesse's room and saying, well, I think that Rachel was inauthentic and fake to me. I felt like he was telling on her almost, like you talk to your teacher. Why don't you have the wherewithal, the emotional maturity to talk to the person that's really bothering you? And that's a really big issue that I have as a relationship coach when people will come to me to talk to me about what's happening with their partner. I always redirect it back to like, hey, you need to have the conversation of them. I'll teach you the tools.
I do that all the time too. I'm like, but did you tell him?
Yeah,
like,
and it's almost never. It's almost never.
Like,
they'll talk to their friends.
No,
they'll do Instagram stories. They'll like talk to their family. They'll listen to songs. They'll do all of these things besides talk to the person that could really help them remedy the problem. Yeah. So to me, in that point, instead of seeing me as an intervention, I'm like, hey, let me teach you these tools to communicate with this person. Let me help you create like this outline, this structure where you can operate in this space and feel like you're going somewhere meaningful of the conversation, but I'm not the person that's going to problem solve this for you.
Right.
Just like Jesse is not the person. So to me, it did kind of show his age when he went to Jesse and he was complaining to Jesse about Rachel. It just felt like this is a little bit childish. You need to talk to Rachel, and Rachel before the rose. Like for him to wait that long too, and for him to stay that activated, get in his head, create these stories about Rachel, and then to dump it on her in such a heated moment, so inconsiderate of Tino and Aven. So to me, I just felt like, okay, maybe Rachel was being a certain way, but Tino, not Tino, I just kind of want to dump on him. But Zach, you should have said something beforehand, and you not saying something beforehand to me shows why you guys are not a compatible match. And the way that you handled it was just super wrong. The way that he spoke about her, not okay. He just called her fake and inauthentic and was like, she took off her mask and I didn't see that side of her, so that must mean she's evil. That must mean she's villainous. It's no, that's not the case.
Well, also, and that's the other thing, it's like, man, you said you loved this woman and then you had one, like,
you were going to get on a knee for her.
Right.
So
you had
then
one
where's the
12
consideration?
Hours. Exactly. You had 12 hours where she wasn't, like, sucking your cock and you're pissed at her now. Like, oh my God. That's what I mean. I'm like, I don't get it. Like, I just feel like people don't want to let Rachel have negative emotions. That's how I feel about this whole situation. Everyone's so freaking mad at her for having any negative feelings, for not wanting to date a nice guy. Everyone's so mad at her about that. And like, I just don't get it. And I completely agree with what you're saying. It felt like Zach was just kind of replicating that. Like, kind of just like, he got into the fantasy suite. He probably had this idea of like, oh, we're gonna have sex and romance talk all night. And like, he probably had this idea about it. And she wanted to have some serious conversations, and she probably didn't like whatever it is that he said, and he was surprised by it. He was surprised to see a moment of her not being just like head over heels for him. And that's the thing. It's like, if your affection for someone is hinged on them just being totally like in love and adoring you, if you only love someone when they are in a state of adoration for you, then it's like, ugh. Is it love? I always say this. It's like, if we can't love people, care about them, even in the moments where they are not able to just be the loving heart eyes girlfriend, like if you cannot love them through all of these different difficult moments, then I just don't know that you actually love them in a full way. Which, I guess, to be fair, Zach was like, well, I guess the Rachel that I loved is different from the Rachel that I saw last night. And it's like, yeah, because maybe you didn't actually love Rachel. Maybe you loved like the idea of this happy, pretty girl who like does fun things with you and laughs and rides bikes with you, but you didn't actually want to love like the real, full, like whole Rachel that has negative feelings, that cries, that sometimes isn't affectionate, that sometimes like feels like there's too much conflict for her to just like cuddle up with you in bed, right? Maybe if you cannot love that Rachel, then maybe you don't actually love Rachel.
Then if he really did love her, then he should have taken that moment to stand firm in his affection and say like, hey, age is not a problem. I really like you. I like you outside of all of this. But instead, his affection wavered because he wasn't all in on Rachel either. Even though he believed, I can get to the end and I can get engaged to this person, he wasn't able to be strong in the face of her insecurities. He's like, hey, what am I getting out of it? And that's not love. Love is not tit for tat. It is, I'm giving to you because I'm unconditionally in love with you. He showed his love, had so many conditions, so many strings. Yeah.
I completely agree. One other thing that I'll say, just regarding this age thing, is he was harping on that, but actually the thing, I don't know if everyone else like noticed this, he kind of glazed over it, but he mentioned that they talked about politics and religion and then got to the age thing. And I remember when he said that, I was like, why did they even, if that doesn't end up being relevant, why would they even leave that in the edit? Why would they, like, what was the point of mentioning that they talked about politics and religion? So I suspect that the conversation that they had wasn't even really about age. I suspect that there was maybe a political difference or a religious difference that actually came up during fantasy suites that neither of them wanted to bring up or mention on camera. And so the age thing is turning into the thing that is the thing. But I don't really know that, I'm not very convinced that that is actually what the conflict was about. We'll see what happens next week. I'm hoping we actually get Rachel's side of the story next week because we literally have not heard from her yet. It kind of makes me mad because now there's just going to be a week of people like shitting on Rachel. Like everyone's like, I trust Zach more than I trust Rachel. Like I saw this like on Twitter. Like, and I'm kind of mad that we're going to have a whole week of people just like building up conspiracy theories about how bad Rachel is and how fake she is, yada, yada, yada. When we haven't even heard her side of the story yet. There is more information that is being withheld from us, and I just think people are being pretty quick to jump. I think, to me, it feels like a bit misogynist, honestly, the reaction that people are having to Rachel. Like, the immediate, like, ooh, like, let's jump on and hate this woman. She's being fake. People love to hate on a fake woman. That's like, fakeness is something that gets leveraged against women all the time as a reason to be mad at a woman. If a woman is poised and keeping it together, she's fake. If a woman is mad and like negative and unaffectionate, she's inauthentic. She's not the woman I thought she was. And it's like, it's kind of like Rachel can't win either way. It stinks a little bit of misogyny to me. And I wish the show would have protected Rachel from some of it instead of leaning into it and being like, okay, let's like dangle this idea that Rachel is a bad person. And then maybe next week we'll reveal the truth.
So Do you believe Rachel or Zach's side of the story? The internet said that they believed Rachel was being manipulative. Obviously, me and Kelly have different opinions about it. We think there's a lot more to the story. But let us know in the comments below and let's engage in a conversation. And by the way, if you're enjoying this conversation so far, do us a favor and hit the like button on this video. It really helps us out a lot.
Okay, let's move into talking about Gabby's fantasy suite. So Gabby also had 3 fantasy suites. She started off with Erich's fantasy suite, then moved to Johnny, and then moved to Jason. Basically what happened was she had a very romantic fantasy suite with Erich. Erich seemed very, very sad to see Rachel go off and do her next 2 fantasy suites with the other 2 guys. Then in the other 2 fantasy suites, they both tanked, and both guys told her they didn't want to get engaged, and both men ended up leaving. So I don't know. Have we ever seen something like this happen in a fantasy suites before? This was so dramatic. She had one guy left standing.
And I wouldn't have expected it for Gabby because, and you and me always say this, the guys are so mid and Gabby is just supreme. She is top of the, like, just everything. She's so great. She's the creme de crop, just awesome. And for these guys to leave, I think really did demonstrate the, like, production and her having such a condensed season, because a lot of these guys haven't had the opportunity to get to really know these leads yet. So I felt like when they got at the end, Johnny, who kind of seems like a good time guy, was like, oh my god, I don't know if I am ready for this.
Sorry,
and Jason,
so Bible.
a good time guy.
I mean, we all know, like,
we all know guys like
this. We know
this,
about that guy. We all know about that guy.
We all know about those guys. They're super fun to hang out with, but you don't get in a relationship with them. At least I don't. You just flirt. They're just fun to flirt with. Like, they're you know, they're kind of always single, always on the ass.
I'm dying.
And Jason, to me, feels like me on a reality dating show, which I texted you that night.
Yeah.
I would have said the exact same thing, like, hey, I know that we're on camera, but this is not real, right? Like, we don't know each other, right? Like, we're not gonna get engaged, right? Like, we're on the same page.
Right.
But the way that it came across was like, hey, you should have said something sooner. You shouldn't have, like, let it get to the end. But let's run it through first. So let's start with Johnny and Jason first, because, come on, they're gone. Let's just talk about the men that left. So with Johnny, I don't know. I wasn't so surprised that he did end up breaking up with her. I really appreciated that he did it before the fantasy suites, because he could have let it get to the end. But once again, it was a really good showing of his character, that he wanted to say something to her on the beach and say, even though you're super dope, you're such a good girl, I love hanging out with you. I love partying with you. I don't see myself getting engaged to you at the end, which I thought was really fair. It was very fair for him to say. I do think that Gabby could have seen him at the end, but he could have been like maybe a top 2. I don't think that he would have been the final person, because it just didn't feel that emotional investment on his side. And to me, it was so confusing when we kept seeing those Bachelor in Paradise trailers, like in the episode of him being clearly on the beach. That let me know, like, okay, I don't know if he's not ready for an engagement with Gabby because he just doesn't know her well enough. And then he's going to go on Bachelor in Paradise, where he will be on the beach for 3 weeks and then get engaged to someone at the end. I don't know. You do get more time on BIP, but to me, it kind of felt a little bit hypocritical, but it also showed that I just don't think Gabby was his person. If he was really into someone, I do think that he would commit, but he just wasn't into Gabby as much as Gabby was into Erich. Yeah.
You know, I have a slightly different take on Johnny. I admit, like, about 2 weeks ago, I thought Gabby should pick Johnny, and, like, clearly that was maybe not the right idea. What I will say about Johnny is, in comparison to Jason, who completely caught Gabby off guard with the fact that he didn't want to get engaged and that he's a realist.
Good point.
When Gabby went into her fantasy suite, at the very start, before she even went there with him, she says to the camera, she's like, I know Johnny has told me that he's not ready for marriage. So she knew that about him. It wasn't a surprise to her. She went in, she knew that this was something that they had to talk about. In comparison to Jason, who apparently withheld this information from her and kind of led her along, as she says to him later. Johnny, she knew that he wasn't in a place for marriage and that this was something that he was struggling with and questioning. So to me, there's a huge difference between what Jason did and what Johnny did, because Johnny was up front the whole time. It seems like she knew this about Johnny this whole time. And so to me, even though Jason has the trappings of a emotionally mature guy, he's been to therapy, yada, 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 at the end of the day, I think he was a lot more, as Gabby said, reckless and careless with Gabby and Gabby's feelings than Johnny is. Johnny the playboy, Johnny the guy who's just here for a good time. Maybe he's just here for a good time, but he was a lot more thoughtful with Gabby and a lot more real with Gabby than Mr. Realist Jason was. Like, and so
so spot on. And
So,
their
like,
breakup was even a lot better. Like, even it was so cute when she was walking away and he was like, "There goes my lady." Just so comedic, and I felt like, oh my gosh, it felt like a Rachel Aven energy almost. Like, if they met outside in the real world, they would have totally lasted. They would have dated for a few years. Maybe it could have led to an engagement. But within this particular format, not so much. And it really did also show, like, Gabby's intelligence in handling that conversation. It was so elegant. It was so thoughtful. It was very much like, I'm releasing you with a lot of love and care. Whereas with Jason, she was a little bit more like, you played with my feelings and you didn't say anything to me, and you kept it from me willingly, and you were really reckless about it. And Jason wasn't even able to respond because it was totally true. He couldn't have a defense against that.
Right. And, the tragedy of it all, honestly, is it seems like they're teasing this for next episode. I guess we'll see what happens, but they're teasing the idea that Erich also doesn't want to get engaged and he wants to just date Gabby. And the tragedy is that she's sending both of these guys home for not wanting to get engaged because she thinks Erich wants to get engaged. But as it turns out, like, she might just be okay with just dating Erich and not getting engaged with him, which makes me wonder, like, man, if she had been able to come around to the idea of, like, maybe she doesn't have to get engaged, would she have kept both of these guys around longer? Like, to me, I'm over Jason because of the way he, like, led her on and just, like, didn't, it was just, like, not honest with her. I kind of think Jason was, like, pretty crummy to her. But Johnny, like, I know we're joking about him. Johnny was so upfront. So part of me is kind of like, listen, do I know that they would have lasted long term? I'm not fully sure, but I think there's a chance. In comparison to, like, when I look at all of these guys, I still think the dynamic between Johnny and Gabby was the healthiest in terms
sparkly, fun,
playful,
light.
fun, light, not, like, weighed down by all this intensity, not, like... I still had my red flags about Erich. I know everyone loves Erich now, but, like, I had my red flags about Erich that were not really alleviated. It's not that I think he's done anything bad since the beginning of the season, but I continue to, like, have question marks around him. And the fact that he is gonna, like, I guess turn around and do the same thing next week of being like, actually, I don't want to get engaged. Again, I'm just like, oh my goodness. Versus Johnny was just so upfront with her. I feel like with Johnny, she was able to, like, really be herself. She was able to, like, have this relationship that felt good and that didn't have all of these complex dynamics of, like, we're lying to each other, we're leading each other on. Like, with Erich, she still has this thing of, like, he's the kind of guy I've dreamed of being. She still has this thing of putting him on a pedestal of, like, the stars were pointing me to you. I'm like, what? Like, she still has this weird thing around Erich that was just so not present with Johnny. So part of me is like, I feel kind of sad that it seems like maybe she's going to get to the end of the season without an engagement, and she might as well have been not engaged with Johnny. Someone else.
It's a good point. It's a good point. So the reason why Erich has won me over, I do like that faded, I'm really romantic. I'm like, ooh, I love that. She kind of sees him as this dream guy, and she really believes that they have such a significant, meaningful connection. I really do think that she's dreamt about And it's not like she is elevating him of all of these qualities that he doesn't have. I think the qualities that he has are things that she just didn't have in her life. I love that he's close to his family. I love that he's so secure. I love that he shows up for me when I have my feelings. He stays strong in the face of them to a point, because he did kind of make a really big no-no when he was like, hey, I think it's like you're cheating on me with the fantasy suites. But it was... underneath that was him saying, I feel like I'm in a really serious relationship with you and I'm being for real. I want you at the end of this and I want you to choose me like I'm fully choosing you. So I think that's what she is projecting onto Erich, and I think Erich's personality can actually hold that because it is pragmatic and it is really realistic. But you're right. If it was just her walking away with a boyfriend, then Johnny could have stayed. Maybe Jason could have stayed if he was able to be honest with Gabby throughout the duration of the relationship. He is so private and he is so quiet. I don't think he volunteers information readily. He seems like the kind of person you need to drag things out of, which is not attractive to me, that kind of communication.
Like, that's the thing. It's like, I don't think being reserved is an excuse to be withholding information from your partner that they need to know in order to make a decision for themselves about what's best for them and whether it makes sense for them to be in a relationship. So you being quiet and you being shy, that doesn't mean that you don't still have a responsibility to protect a person who could get hurt by your whatever you're trying to figure. To me, it felt like Logan, actually. It reminded me of the Logan thing, where the problem was not that Logan wanted to date Gabby instead of Rachel. The problem is that he was thinking about it for weeks and didn't tell Rachel. And that's the same thing with Jason. It's like, the problem is not that he didn't want to get engaged, because at the end of the day, I mean, you and I definitely agree. I think that, you know, both Johnny and Jason are smart. They're being real. You know, that's commendable. Like, I don't think you should get engaged after 2 months. I do think that it is, especially in this environment that is such a fantasy environment, I really don't think it makes sense to ever get engaged at the end of this show. That being said, you have joined this show under the premise, with the agreement, with the understanding that this girl is dating you, thinking that you're going to get engaged to her at the end. And so the fact that Jason has been thinking about this, he called himself a realist. I don't really know you. You don't really know me. Sure, I think that's true. I actually agree with all of that. I find all of that stuff really attractive. But the fact that you had been thinking all of this, you knew this about yourself the whole time, and you didn't say a single thing to Gabby about it. You let her think. She kept saying the whole time, like, I never have to question Jason's intentions. I know Jason is here for me to, like, be there at the end with me. It's like, she clearly had there was such a disconnect between what she thought about him and who he actually was, and that's on him for not saying something to her, and that's on him for not being clear about his intentions. So I am so mad at what Gabby said, which is that I've been trying so hard to not be reckless with other people, and he was reckless with me.
Heartstopper.
Oh my God, that broke me, because it's true. That's what it is. It's like the recklessness, right? You know, people are allowed to not want to date you. People are allowed to not want to get engaged. The same thing with Logan. It's like, all of that is fine. It's the recklessness. You can't be reckless with other people's emotions. You have to make sure that if people are going to be in a risky position, they need to decide that for themselves. They need to have all of the information and consent into this risky situation. You can't decide that for them. You can't bring them along when you are still not sure what you want, you know? And like, if you tell them that you're not sure about what you want, if you tell them, hey, I don't know that I want to get engaged at the end of this, and they still decide to date you, it's a fully different thing than you keeping that in the back of your head for yourself, by yourself, thinking about it while making this girl think that you are going to get engaged to her at the end. That's the problem. It's the transparency. It's the lack of transparency. And I would rather have someone be honest with me about them not knowing what they want than to lie to me, make me think that they're in it, when in reality they're going to get to the end when I'm already kind of in love with you and tell me, actually, I've been questioning this the whole time.
And it's lying by omission. The transparency came too late. And if she had known that beforehand, I think that she would have kept some other guys around before Jason. I don't know who, because I don't really know what other connections there were for her.
I know.
I just don't think she had enough time to develop them, but she wouldn't have kept Jason as long, or she would have had a better understanding of, maybe I'm not going to get engaged at the end of this. Maybe these 3 guys are just contenders for boyfriends. I will choose differently based on this information now. It's annoying the way that these guys are just being so careless with Gabby, who is being so thoughtful, so honest. They did not give her the same kind of understanding and the same kind of empathy, which to me makes me believe your guy is not on this. It's not on this season.
Completely agree.
Erich is kind of rising above these men, but I don't think he is necessarily the guy that she's going to get engaged with. Yeah. I want her to pull a Tayshia almost, where she just starts dating like celebrities and like NFL players. Like, I want her to not really be stuck with these crop of men.
I think that if she was on BIP, for example, I think she would be a hot commodity. Like, I think she would be like Hannah G style, you know, Serena style. Like, I think that she would be so like poppin' on BIP. First of all, because she's just like fine as hell and she looks good in a bathing suit.
She's so hot. Her body, like, I don't want to objectify her, but like, unreal.
It's true.
Her outfits.
Every time she comes on, like, when she reveals what she's wearing in any scene, I'm like, oh my god. Like, what?
Her breakup outfit for Jason, I was like, I want that orange number. I want that fit on me.
I know. I was like, influence me, Gabby. Influence me.
Then to see her being subjugated to these awful emotions of insecurity and worthlessness because these men are not able to give her what she wants, it's such a failing of the show that they weren't able to uplift her the way that she deserved to be.
Yeah. So I guess we should talk about Erich, because Erich is the guy that is left, and it seems like they are really in love and vibing. By the end of the episode, Johnny and Jason were gone. Gabby goes, tells Erich they're gone, and basically is like, I love you. Let's just do the thing, you and me.
You're the only one left. I know it's like so hard, and I think I've felt it for a while, but I do know that I love you.
I love you.
It's a really sweet scene. I just continue to have these reservations about Erich. After their fantasy suite, right, Erich came and visited Gabby, like, right before her date with Jason, and, like, brought up again that he's sad about sleeping with other guys, and she was upset because it seemed like they had already talked about it during their fantasy suite date. Wonder what they were saying in that fantasy suite, because the fact that he brought it up again, she was so upset about what he was saying, but she was really upset that he brought it up again on camera, right? She seemed to be like, are we going to talk about this? Do you want me to talk about this here on camera? Like, that was kind of like her energy, as if there was something that they had said privately in fantasy suites that they were not trying to not say on camera. And there's so much that we can say about the whole fantasy suite dynamic of, like, one of the 3 people being jealous or upset that the lead is having sex with other people. Like, there's so much to say about that. I think it's like a valid feeling for someone to have, to feel like it is scary or just like anxiety inducing and just really upsetting and just discombobulating to have your girlfriend go and have sex with 2 other guys, or your boyfriend go and have sex with 2 other girls. It makes sense to be upset about it, and at the same time, you go on this show knowing that it's going to happen. You go on this show with this is not new. Fantasy Suites has existed since the show has existed, so it's not new that this is going to happen. And so I do think that what she was saying about Erich, which is that it felt like he was testing me, or like, you know, that he brought it up a second time, it felt like it was like he was putting this pressure on me to just decide right away, that to just like, basically she was saying like, felt like he wanted me to just like run away with him. Very similar to like how Greg and Katie on Katie's season. Yeah. Right? Greg was like, run away with me. It's clearly me. Like, stop doing this whole process and just run away with me. That felt very kind of similar to what was happening with Erich. I don't know that it was bad for Erich to bring it up to her. Like, I think if he's feeling it, he should say it. He should talk to her about it. I just think that, is Fantasy Suites cheating? I don't know if I buy that.
I don't think Fantasy Suites is cheating. I think it's maybe a little bit unfair because one person is having all of these relationships, and you need to really trust in the connection that your connection is going to supersede the others. To me, it just felt a little bit manipulative because Erich walked into the season knowing those conditions, and then he tried to change it to match his comfort level. And Gabby, I believe, in their fantasy suites, reassured him and basically told him that she's going to wait for him, but she needs to see these other connections too. And to me, what I believe he thought it meant was like, well, if you knew it was me, then why wouldn't you just be with me? And then him bringing it up on camera was him trying to, I think he wanted reassurance, but it sounded to Gabby like it was trapping her. Like, now you want me to say it on camera that I want to be with you, that all of these things are happening. It's kind of like leaving a paper trail almost so that he wouldn't look foolish.
By nature of him kind of re-bringing it up, harping on it to her, essentially what that does is, even if he doesn't get to say directly, don't go on the fantasy suite, what he does get to do is plant the guilt, plant this feeling of, if she goes on that fantasy suite with Jason and goes to the overnight, he has planted this feeling in her that this is wrong, that if you enjoy this, you're a bad person. It kind of plants this essentially sabotages her next overnight, right? It makes it harder for her to really connect with Jason in the next overnight. And that's the part of it that, to me, feels unfair. It feels like he kind of exerted control over her story and her agency and her ability to pick who she really wants to be with at the end. Like, I can imagine, let's say that the Jason date went well, which it didn't, but let's say it did, and then she is like getting in bed with Jason and they're starting to hook up, and then she hears Erich's words in the back of her fucking mind, which makes it harder for her to truly connect in the moment with Jason, right? And so like that's the thing about these, they're not ultimatums, but like it's like it's a way, it is manipulative, right? It's a way to exert control over someone's behavior without directly being like, don't do that, right? It's a way to like make her feel guilty so she's less likely to do the thing that you don't want her to do, right? And that is manipulation, right? And so, I don't know. I don't think Erich's a bad guy. I just get some bad vibes, and I worry. I don't feel like I know enough from him, or I've seen enough positive from him for me to feel confident in saying, I think he's a good match for Gabby.
Right, and it's one of my concerns as well. It's the concern that Erich doesn't trust in the process of the show, which is what Gabby's trusting in. So that's already a fundamental mismatch. And Gabby has to compartmentalize. That's what she's doing as the bachelorette. She can't let Erich and his judgments bleed into her relationships with the other men, because she has like 2 other guys that she was fielding on top of Erich, and they each deserve their own space, their own energy, and her being her full self with them. And for Erich to want to limit that because he feels really insecure was kind of confusing to me, because when she told him that she loved him, one of the reasons why she loved him was because he was so secure in the face of her insecurities. And I didn't think that he showed his best self towards the end. It just makes me feel like she might be settling a little bit because she so desperately wants an engagement. She wants the process to work out, that she has her blinders on, not about Erich per se, but about, I want this so much at the end, and Erich is the only one at the end.
Okay, let us know what you all think about how Gabby's season has played out and your predictions for how her story is going to end, and about Rachel's season. How do you think that these 2 girls' stories are going to end in these next 2 weeks? Tell us down below. Are you happy with Gabby and Erich's relationship? Do you think that Rachel and Tino will be a good match? What do you think is going on with Rachel and Zach? Give us your thoughts. We want to talk about it. Whew, wow, this has been a long conversation so far. If you are still here watching all the way to this point of the video, I feel like you are like legit a real HTFL fan. Like, if you are still watching to this point in the video, drop a comment down below and just be like, wow, this went off the rails. Like, wow, this went off the rails. That's a secret phrase, and we'll know you're the real one.
We'll look out for you. All right, make sure to hit that subscribe button to join the HTFL family. We'll be back for part 1 of the finale, which is, I'm so excited. That trailer gave me life. I was living.
I was so excited. I mean, it's so funny that you and I always come on here and we're ranting about like, everyone needs to be nicer to each other.
We don't like the drama. And then last night I was on the edge of my seat. I was like, please inject this into my veins.
Oh my God, totally. I mean, I hate what everyone's doing, but this is so fun.
I can't wait to see what happens. I can't wait to see the final people at the end. I can't wait to see their dresses.
Can't wait.
The proposals, the drama, it's just going to be amazing. So tune in next week and we'll talk to you guys then. Bye.
Bye.